Hey everyone, welcome back to DWeb Decoded, a podcast by Filecoin Foundation that explores the intersection of blockchain and the data economy. I'm your host, Aaron Stanley, and today I'm excited to be joined by Michael Madoff, who's head of governance at Filecoin Foundation. Michael has a rich background in governance studies and practice, both inside and outside the world of blockchain. So we're going to be learning more about that today and discussing his vision for governance within the Filecoin network. Michael, it's great to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Aaron. I've been a long-time listener of the show, so really excited to be a part of this.
Awesome. To get started, why don't you give us a quick TLDR of your role at Filecoin and why you decided to join the project?
Yeah, sure thing. So I joined the Filecoin Foundation a couple of months ago as the new head of governance. And for those of you that don't know, the Filecoin Foundation's role is to steward the Filecoin ecosystem and enable it to govern itself. And so since I've joined, I've spun up something called the Constellation Program for Governance Reform, looking to modernize the economic, operational, and protocol governance of Filecoin itself. And right now, we're really focused on listening to members of the ecosystem, mapping out their pain points, turning that into a phased, inclusive, and accountable set of reforms about how decisions are made over the network. And I joined because actually initially I was using IPFS in my previous role. We were archiving governance data for the Cardano blockchain. And I had this idea, a side project with a couple of friends, that we should start archiving real world government data that was being deleted at an alarming rate. And so I did a little bit of digging about how we can make this happen. And I stumbled across the Democracy's Library project that the Filecoin Foundation supports, and also saw that they were hiring for a head of governance. So I think, like a lot of people in the Web3 space, saw a way to turn my hobby and passion into a full-time role, and very excited to be joining up.
Very cool. No, I love that background. So you've got quite a rich familiarity with not just IPFS and Filecoin, but also with some of the pain points and the problems that we're trying to solve, particularly on the government data front. It's very cool to hear that this was kind of like already a side project of yours that you had taken an interest in. You had mentioned your work with Cardano in the past, but I'd love to learn a bit more about your career and your background as it relates to governance, perhaps both in the context of blockchain and maybe outside the context of blockchain as well. But tell us a bit about that. What is it that excites you about this topic? And maybe, what are some of your kind of core operating theses or assumptions for, why blockchain governance is needed, how it can be most effective, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out, actually been interested in this governance topic for a long time. I started out at the Georgetown School of Foreign Service, which is the training program for the U.S. Diplomatic Corps, and was studying political science and international relations, and really getting at this core question of how people from different backgrounds with different interests learn to interact and work with each other in a way that's productive and resolves conflict. From there, I did a stint at the Boston Consulting Group doing strategy for Fortune 500s and governments, and really got interested in this kind of fintech world and blockchain technology in particular. And prior to joining Filecoin Foundation, I was working in the Cardano ecosystem at a company called Input Output that builds the Cardano blockchain. And while I was there, built this on-chain, off-chain governance system for Cardano, and happy to elaborate on that a little bit. But to answer your question, what really interests me in this topic, I believe that blockchain's true promise is not just financial or technological, but really it's a political technology at the core. And what do I mean by that? If you think about a small village of 100 people, governance is a pretty easy concept, right? It's understood how you behave, how you interact with other members of your village that you know and trust in person. But as our societies get larger, there is this trade-off between scale and trust as the population gets bigger, as society gets more complex, you need these cumbersome bureaucratic systems to be able to enforce the fact that you can no longer fully trust everyone else that you have to transact with and interact with. Maybe just to give an example, I recently moved to Canada and I'm trying to figure out all of the Canadian US tax treaty rules and how does this apply to me? And we've created this incredibly complex and bureaucratic system, and why have we done this to ourselves? And it's really this lack of trust in modern society and institutions that has kind of led us to this point that I think a lot of people are frustrated by. And so my core career thesis, I would say, is that blockchain technology allows for trustless interactions that break this trade-off at scale, that allow us to interact with people all around the world in a way that we can have that trust enforced by code.
No, I love that answer. And I think you're right. I think you're 100% right on in this assumption that I think that the kind of the meta right now in blockchain Web3 crypto world is really like stable coins, payments, tokenizing assets, and Bitcoin as store of value. I do think there's like a lot of room there's a lot of room to run with this idea of blockchain governance and how can we use these types of systems as ways of better kind of organizing, whether it be human society in general or whether it be just kind of micro ecosystems like a Filecoin or like a Cardano. There's still like I feel like there's just so much potential here that hasn't really been like fully tapped into. That and it's desperately needed, right? As for the reasons you mentioned. Um, let's turn back to Cardano that you mentioned because Cardano is interesting because it has a reputation of really being one of the more kind of innovative and effective projects in blockchain in the area of governance specifically. I was hoping you could tell us a bit more about that, particularly like the liquid democracy model that they constructed. Maybe tell us a bit about that. What was your involvement? What are some of the big learnings, takeaways from that project?
Yeah, so I spent about 2.5 years working on Cardano, and when I joined the project, it was really a founding entity governance model. There were these three founding entities that had the control between them directly over the blockchain. And Cardano has an extremely passionate community who are very philosophically aligned, I would say, with the idea of decentralized governance and very interested in being involved in governance as a concept. And so we had to go through this process of progressive decentralization, handing over power in a gradual way to the community. And it's premised on this model called liquid democracy. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the concept, this is actually a very old idea that in a democracy, rather than electing people for fixed terms, you should be able to change your vote at any time based on how you feel that your representatives are serving you. So if someone votes for something you don't like, the next day you can withdraw your delegation, assign it somewhere else, and this actually idea was thought up in the 1800s. It was actually invented by the guy who's the author of Alice in Wonderland, strangely enough. But had this idea of like, how can we, in this fantasy society, how can we reorganize our preferences to be much more efficient? And it didn't really become technologically possible until blockchain technology was introduced to be able to do this, right? And so we rolled out this liquid democracy model where holders of Cardano delegate to what we call DREPs, their delegate representative, and that individual votes on their behalf on topics of interest within the ecosystem. And it's been a huge success. The system just surpassed 1,500 people who volunteered to be these delegate representatives. We've had tens of thousands of delegators, holders of the token, decide to delegate from their wallet. So it's a really robust and active participation. But actually, part of the way that we got there, and I think was really interesting learning for Filecoin here. We started with something called Project Catalyst, which is a participatory budgeting concept. And this allowed people to vote in kind of a low stakes environment for the funding of innovation projects. And this was great because it allowed us to build up this governance muscle. Right? People are accustomed to participating. They have skin in the game because they're receiving funding, but we're not yet making decisions about the blockchain itself. And so there was a kind of a long road of growth for the community to become comfortable with the concept of self-governance. And then the final piece that the Cardano puzzle that I think was a really interesting experience was writing a constitution. And the last couple of years, we went through this exercise of doing constitutional workshops in 50 countries around the world where there was a Cardano community. And then we had all of those delegates elected from those workshops come together in person and write a constitution at a constitutional dimension and say, what are the values of this ecosystem, this community that we willingly consent to agree and abide by. And I think that was a really powerful symbol of what's possible through this kind of blockchain collaboration.
Yeah, what I love about that and what you built at that in the Cardano ecosystem is the participatory angle, right? Like this is it's not just, okay, there's some whales that own a bunch of tokens, whether it be VCs or large investors or whatever that just kind of own all the tokens and they kind of basically control everything. And all the little guys who might own, if all the retail folks who might own a few tokens might be interested in, but like their votes basically don't really matter because they're so small and they're just like, why should I care if A16Z is just going to decide everything, right? But in your case, like you've done in the Cardano case, I should say, is like you guys did a very good job of getting the little guys like involved and like giving them skin in the game and giving them some sort of like meaningful participation that wasn't, at least my understanding, this isn't just like like, oh hey, you have a voice. So it's like no, like you actually, like your voice actually matters and there's actual things you can do to impact how this ecosystem evolves. And I mean, maybe just riff on that a little bit more. Like what was like that like, why was that so important to just have kind of like the everyday investor, involved in this and not just the big whales or the big, VCs or whatever that might be holding a lot of the bags?
Yeah, I guess if I put my political scientist hat on for a moment, this is about checks and balances in a system of governance and having power derived from different sources that are not necessarily kind of self-fulfilling, and that's how you avoid problems like oligarchy, like concentration of power, and that keep a system in balance. And so, yeah, I think we really made an effort to say this is not just a token voting system. This is not just a time where technical experts are going to run everything, but there are actually many different interests that need to be represented. People that are running businesses, people that are in it for the philosophical alignments, and kind of everything in between need a way to express their interests in a way that doesn't concentrate power too much.
I love that. Um, and I'd love to get into, or maybe pivot a little bit here into just how you plan on incorporating some of these ideas and these learnings from Cardano and from your other experiences into the Filecoin world. Um, would love to maybe talk a bit about kind of what your ambitions are, what your roadmap is, what your vision is, or maybe next 12, 18 months, and maybe even longer term than that. And it might also be helpful to get kind of a refresher on just how Filecoin governance kind of has maybe historically worked, like what are some of those processes, et cetera. Um, but yeah, it would be great to kind of get your download on how do you see some of these learnings and experiences benefiting Filecoin.
Definitely. And so, how Filecoin governance has historically worked, it was actually borrowed from the Ethereum governance model called the Ethereum Brutal Proposal Process, or EIPs, you might have heard of. We started something called the FIP process. It's kind of the equivalent, and it's very technical, developer driven. Things are proposed on GitHub, debated there. These are generally technical changes to the protocol, and it moves through a process of soft consensus in which basically looking for any objection to a given proposal. And so when you have, in most engineering contexts, it is a proposal that is going to just make the product or the protocol better for everyone, right? Everyone wants faster, cheaper, more resilient. And so this process is fine as long as almost everyone agrees. But as soon as you start getting into more conflicting scenarios and you start talking about economic decisions where there are real winners and losers of the outcome of decision, and that's when debate really starts to heat up, and you need to start introducing mechanisms that allow for hard decisions to be made. And I think that's where having a robust governance system really counts, when those hard decisions have to be made, and there are people that are in different camps and different interest groups, and all of that needs to be reconciled in a way that even if people don't agree with the outcome, they agree that it was arrived at through a fair and transparent process that they can understand. And so what we're doing to address some of those early pain points in the Filecoin ecosystem, we've introduced something called the Constellation Program for Filecoin governance evolution. And this is our framework for evolving the governance system. And we call it Constellation because you want to think of the many entities within the Filecoin ecosystem as a star, right? Each one is unique and has its own interests, has its own way that it operates. But when you look at all of those stars together, you start to get a map of where the ecosystem is going and what are the interrelationships between all of those different entities, whether you're an individual storage provider, whether you're a Filecoin Foundation. All of these are kind of pieces of this bigger constellation, and so when they are working together in harmony, that's what we want to achieve. And so this is a deliberate, phased, modular approach to improving how decisions are made and how ecosystem resources are allocated for maximum impact. And so the approach that we want, instead of a sweeping overhaul, is really the Constellation Program progresses in linear stages. Each module is piloted, tested under real world conditions, and then refined before scaling up across the network. And so that's kind of the approach that we're taking in a linear way, but also thinking about what is being governed. We've kind of broken the decision space into a framework of three pillars. The first one being economic, the second being operational, and the third being protocol. And all of these need to work together to keep resilient system.
Yeah, I was just going to actually ask about the three pillars approach here and how you've broken this out. So you have the economic, operational, and protocol. Maybe let's kind of maybe go into each of those specifically. Maybe give a bit more detail, and then maybe how do they all kind of fit together, like you're just describing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like I mentioned, there's this three pillar system, and yeah, sorry, introduce more metaphors here. You think about it like a building, right? Uh, you need all of the support pillars of the building to support the roof of it, and you also need an underlying foundation of all of these elements, right? Infrastructure, tools, meta governance, which is like setting the rules for how rule sets are made. But then in each of these pillars, we're trying to capture all of the possible decision scenarios that the blockchain and the ecosystem might face. And so I think our top priority right now is the economic pillar and stabilizing the Filecoin economy, stabilizing what does the incentive structure look like, what does the funding structure look like for long-term sustainability of the protocol, funding for infrastructure and research, and making sure that it's a stable economy. And I think if you listen to some of the talks that Juan gives, he really talks about Filecoin as an economy in and of itself, right? You have imports and exports and a monetary base, and I think there's been a lot of good lessons learned about how to manage an economy from a macro and micro perspective that we really want to take forward into this. And so that could be around rewards distribution, storage and retrieval incentives, how we govern things like the mining reserve and treasuries. And what we want to come away with is a very good model for public goods funding that can pay for infrastructure and development, but ultimately we have a fair and viable economic participation model for the network that everyone understands. And so that's, it's a kind of top priority at the moment is a lot of experiments that are going on in the economic pillar. Second is the operational pillar. And this is really about managing off-chain coordination. And so that running the FIT process as it is today, running community meetings, network upgrades, various groups and how they give feedback into the system. And this is really kind of the bread and butter of governance, listening to people, letting them debate, coming to consensus at a human level. And how we want to evolve this gradually is defining roles, responsibilities, and processes for clear governance throughout the governance lifecycle, and that's going from proposal to discussion to implementation. What role does each participant play? What are their powers? And then this is about ensuring kind of inclusivity, but also productivity, and how do you have those checks and balances, but also have the efficiency to act with such a technical and ongoing concern. And then finally, at the protocol level, this is pillar 3, and this is kind of where we put on-chain decision making as a concept, and I'd say that's kind of furthest out in terms of what we want to develop and grow. But it's all about the technical evolution of the protocol, the upgrade process, infrastructure rules, like what are the parameters and consensus mechanism, forums and different decision-making contexts, and then making sure that the on-chain implementation of upgrades is aligned with community values and in the other pillars. And so, that's how we're looking at it in terms of the scope of what needs to be governed.
That makes a lot of sense. I like how you've broken it out into these 3 subsets, because I think each one is maybe like governance as a whole is like this massive topic, right? But when you kind of break it out into these subsets, it's like, okay, that's a little bit easier to digest and understand. Okay, what's the objective here? What are we actually trying to
Exactly.
achieve? And what's the way that you actually go about doing that? And then it also allows you to kind of prioritize certain things. Like, okay, well, first we're gonna be focusing more on the economic stuff, and then the protocol stuff is a bit maybe further down the roadmap, essentially, as we as that becomes more necessary or more pressing. Um, I did want to ask about the Phil Plus, Filecoin Plus program. Like, how does that? I mean, there's I feel like Filecoin Plus is always under some sort of change or reform of some sort, but like, how does that maybe fit in? Like, what pillar would like a program like this kind of fit into or fit underneath in this pillar structure you're talking about?
Yeah, so Phil Plus is pretty firmly in the economic pillar, and it really has to do with the uh, block rewards system, but also kind of that alignment between that block reward system and the philosophy of Filecoin of storing humanity's useful data. And so, how do we connect that base layer economic incentive with where we aspire to be as a project? And I think there are a lot of smart people that are working on reforming and making a better process for how that is going to work in the future. And then I would also say aligning with the business strategy of Filecoin. We had an exciting announcement just last month in Argentina of Filecoin on-chain cloud as a concept. And so what are the economic policies around that on-chain cloud concept that would need to enable Filecoin to be successful as a business and increase those exports that generate value for Filecoin as an economy.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on maybe comparing how governance, both like the structure and also the needs of governance, the unique needs of governance within the Filecoin system, maybe compares to other Web3 ecosystems that you've been a part of. And I think what makes Filecoin interesting in this respect is you do have this very tangible connection between like the on-chain and the off-chain. It's like, yeah, we have this whole on-chain economy, but at the end of the day, we have like physical data centers that are in like physical hard drives and GPU that are storing the data, right? These are brick and mortar facilities, right? And these are actually like kind of their own almost like franchises within the Filecoin network. So you do have this kind of this interesting intersection of on and off chain that you don't necessarily have in other ecosystems. And I think this probably makes governance maybe a little bit more complicated in some ways, but it also might make it a little bit easier in other ways. So I'd be interested in just hearing, like, from your impressions of like how are maybe like the governance needs and requirements unique in Filecoin vis-a-vis some other ecosystems you've been a part of.
Yeah, I think what's special about Filecoin and what really differentiates it in the Web3 world is how much of a tangible, real product it is, right? Anyone can understand that uh, data needs to be stored and how the governance of the process for storing that data is a really core question. And so I think a lot of other ecosystems, this concept of what needs to be governed is more abstract because the product is more abstract, and a lot of projects haven't necessarily decided what the purpose in a tangible real world sense of their product is. And so yeah, like you said, in some ways it makes it easier because it narrows the scope of what we're talking about and how much flexibility and evolution there is. I think it also changes a lot of the stakeholder incentives because a lot of people participating in Filecoin are here to run a business, and that business is here to make a profit. That's a very rational outcome that we want to see, and we have to set up the incentives in a way that aligns that desire to make a profit with the philosophical long-term outcome that we want of the protocol itself. In terms of comparison to other ecosystems, so got back from a couple of weeks in Argentina. It was really cool to see the breadth of everything that was happening at DevCon and Filecoin Developer Summits. Went to a couple of smaller side events that were focused on governance. There was a whole governance day. There was I think called Funding Commons. That's all about different experiments and public goods funding and how that is taking place. There was one called Shelling Point. So had just a lot of interesting conversations about this Cambrian explosion of how people are thinking about governance that is being enabled by emerging technology in this space. And so, of course, there was a lot of talk about AI as the trendy new governance topic. And I think I talked to some folks at Near Protocol, for example, who are experimenting with this AI delegation model, right? Instead of having a representative that you elect, what if it is an AI that has a prompt that you philosophically agree with, but the mechanics of voting are actually done by that AI, and that helps mitigate a lot of the problems we see around voter fatigue, around apathy, and so interesting example to me. There's some interesting talk. I know you had someone from the BitTensor ecosystem on the podcast a while ago, and
Yeah.
really thinking about kind of market models for governance also, and this concept of competing subnets and how we introduce competition and prediction markets and kind of more economically driven governance into this protocol context. And then learned a lot from the Ethereum folks who were developing some very cool models around things like deep funding, which is again we're kind of using prediction markets as a mechanism for funding funding projects. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of innovation happening out there, and I really want to position Filecoin to be moving towards that innovation to skate where the puck is going, if you'll excuse the Canadian metaphor.
But hey, you live in Montreal now, so you gotta deploy that.
Exactly. I'm working on those.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, you have a license to deploy these hockey metaphors for sure. Uh, well, no, that's super interesting, and you kind of front ran my last question actually, which is going to be asking a bit about what are some of the more innovative governance models you've been looking at in the Web3 ecosystem, and yeah, and I agree. The AI subject I think is really fascinating. Like what if you could take you kind of vote on this constitution, like in kind of Cardano fashion, like you're mentioning, the community votes on a constitution, and it's sort of like up to the AI to basically govern the ecosystem following the principles outlined in the constitution, for example, whether it be, you know, around like economic activity, or whether it be around, even just like, treasury management or burn rates, or, whatever it might be. Like, there's a lot of interesting things that come into play here.
Yeah.
Even this idea of like kind of proxy voting, like you were mentioning, because like, like I'm not going to vote on every single little detail, but like if I have an AI that can kind of be my proxy voter that knows how I would vote in this situation, if I had the time to do so,
Yeah.
that becomes a lot more interesting, and it probably, enabling more of a participatory democracy if you can, if individuals can kind of delegate some of these decisions to an AI that like understands how I vote on these things 99% of the time.
Yeah.
Um,
On the other hand, I do have kind of mixed feelings about that topic, because I also believe that governance over technology is kind of the last way that we keep humans in charge and in the
keep
loop and on top
humans
of
relevant, right?
what's happening with. I mean, you see this especially in AI right now, because it's the emerging technology, and there's this world of, go one direction and cause a lot of problems. It can go another direction and solve a lot of things. And what makes the difference there, I believe, is the governance of those systems and being able to get good human judgment and decision making to influence the technology outcome. And I think that's true of all kinds of emerging technologies. Like, the success you see is really tied to how they're governed. If you think about the atomic age, and when people were inventing nuclear energy, there was this scenario in which they destroy the whole world, and there's the scenario where you have limitless clean energy. And it was really a success of creating good governing institutions between countries, between people, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and so on, that made the difference between that, one world we could have ended up in, and a better one that we're in right now. And yeah, I think the same thing is going to be applicable to AI and quantum and every new technology that comes forward. And I think that's why it's super important what we're doing right now in blockchain governance, to develop that muscle and those technologies that will enable us to stay in control as humans.
Yeah, we definitely want to avoid any type of, nuclear holocaust equivalent. I think we
Always best.
could all agree on that, right? But yeah, it is interesting in that, even as sophisticated as these AI systems could become and whatnot, and even acting as maybe a delegate on our behalf, it's like we still haven't figured out a way to match. I mean, human creativity and ingenuity is still far superior to AI, at least as of right now, right? Maybe in 10 years that'll be different, but at least as of right now, like you need human ingenuity, human coordination, human creativity to like make these things like really work properly and develop, the results that are actually beneficial for everybody. Um, so yeah, I'm fully like I love how you're approaching this in the sense of like, let's use these technologies, but let's not like sort of just outsource everything. And then all of a sudden, we're like, why did we do that? That was a terrible idea,
Exactly.
right? So, um, well, on that note, maybe this is a good point to wrap it up. Would love to just hear if there's any, kind of call to action for Filecoin ecosystem participants you might have. How can folks either get involved in Filecoin governance or become more involved in Filecoin governance? What's your message to those folks?
Yeah, the message about governance that I always try to leave people with is it's not magic. Right. It's not a silver bullet, like you pick a perfect governance system and then everything is solved. You, as a member of the community, as a member of the ecosystem, have to show up and have to participate in whether it's community meetings or decision-making mechanisms or giving your feedback. That's the only way any governance system can be successful in setting direction and mitigating risk. And so, what I really want, kind of from a big picture perspective, is inviting members of the community to co-build governance with us. And practically speaking, that means joining working groups. We have a weekly public governance working group where we talk about these kinds of issues. And if this is something that interests you, you're definitely invited to come there. We have very robust fit discussions happening in GitHub. We are participating in governance day style events at conferences around kind of the Web3 world. We also, as this Constellation program progresses, want to have community workshops around, do we need a Filecoin constitution? Do we need voting and decision making mechanisms? This is something we really want to bring the whole community to participate in. And so there's a lot of high impact ways that you can participate. And yeah, I think if you care about Filecoin's mission and digital stewardship, there's a seat at the table for you. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, hey, Michael, really appreciate your time today. I've really enjoyed just hearing about your really like refreshing and passionate take on governance and like why this is so important. I think you bring a lot of creativity, a lot of new ideas to the table, and you've got like a pretty impressive track record as well, implementing these in other kind of off chain and on chain settings, which is super exciting. So really appreciate you joining us today and giving us kind of the download on your vision for Filecoin governance moving ahead. And yeah, I mean, just to close out, how can folks best get in touch with you if they want to connect?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm at Decentramike on Twitter and Blue Sky and the other social medias. And you can also reach me at Michael at phil.org if you want a more traditional pathway.
Amazing. Well, Michael Madoff, really appreciate your time. And thanks everyone for watching. And we'll see you next time on DWeb Decoded.